And welcome back. So in the last video we discovered that we had a bent intake push rod on the number 4 cylinder and number 7 cylinder, with the number 4 cylinder being a significantly higher degree of bend than on the driver's side. So we replaced the intake push rods. I didn't bring you along for that one because, and I'll explain here very shortly, but we put the intake rods in, torqued the valve rails back down, and the number 4 seemed to come around. There's still a little bit of play, a little bit of slop in it, but it did start to actuate the intake valve when we turned the engine over by hand. The number 7 cylinder, which is on the driver's side, if you remember, all the way back, unfortunately did not. Even with the new push rod in place and everything torqued down, it literally is not, the push rod itself isn't being pushed far enough out by the lifter to get it to stay into the rocker arm. So literally with it torqued down, there's enough slop in there you could reach in and pull the push rod back out. So there's no way that's going to fly. Now, so what I'm theorizing at this point, after speaking to a friend of mine, and we think wholeheartedly, at least a collapsed lifter on the number 7 intake at this point. The number 4 intake is also skeptical, suspect, I should say. There's no way of saying it, because as we were turning the engine over by hand, there were a couple of times it wasn't as smooth as I would liked it to be. So with that being said, you can see, probably tell, we have a slight change of location. We now have it up here a little bit closer to the garage. We used its younger, bigger sister there, you can see our 2500, to pull the older, smaller sister up into position so that we're a little bit closer to the garage, a little bit easier to work on, and we're not working out into the street. And that should make at least one of my neighbors happier. So what we're going to do at this point is pull the intake, pull the heads, and get the lifters out, especially the problem cylinders, cylinders 7 and 4, and see what the condition of those lifters look like. Also look at, again, not only looking for either stuck open or stuck closed lifters, but you know, what do the rollers on the end of it look like? Has this thing started to eat into the cam? You know, who knows? Once we get all that done and unbolted and out of the way, I want to be able to, or I should say, then we'll be able to inspect the tops of the pistons better, the cylinders themselves, see if there's any scoring in there, and then with the intake and heads off and all the accessories off, we can then spin the engine over by hand and verify that it's still nice and smooth and we don't potentially have any issues on the low end, because the goal is, if the low end of this engine is still good, I would like to rebuild the upper part of the engine. Now I know what you're thinking, why go through all this effort when I've mentioned that we have, which I haven't made a video on yet, it is coming, our Project Truck 2, our red one that we borrowed our fuel rail off of. You know, why not just pull the motor out of that and slam it into this one? And we can do that, but to me, I'd rather see if we can rebuild this one and make a good motor out of it before proceeding with just an outright replacement. Now, don't get me wrong, if we tear the heads off and do a little bit more in-depth internal inspection and see even more issues with it, then yeah, we'll absolutely just pull the motor at that point and just do a motor swap. But part of the reasons is seeing all the work that was done to this truck to deliberately make it not run, and by deliberate I mean deliberate. Sugar in the gas tank, which made its way up to the fuel rail, toasting some of the injectors, toasting the fuel pump, finding numerous cut ABS wheel speed sensor wires. Again, just a strong indication that the damage that was done to this poor truck, the abuse that it took, was deliberate. So now the goal is to show a little bit of spite and fix what somebody broke. get it back up and running again, just to show them, as well as, like I said, this truck's destined for an alternate life once we get it back up and running, someplace where it can be used very much used better than what it can be down here. But with that said, you can see that we do have our brake booster reattached, and that's because we use the braking system to help get it pulled up in here into the driveway. And yes, of course, it means I have to now deinstall the brake booster once again, and then eventually when we put it back in, re-bleed the lines. And we did bleed the lines when we put the brake booster back in to make sure we had sufficient brakes to tow this. And I saved this for you because I thought you might like to see it. This is what used to be, once upon a time, brake fluid. And this is what came out of, we bled all 4 brakes, and this is what came out of this. So we cycled quite a bit of fresh fluid into the master cylinder and bled the brakes, as you can see. And like I said, that was the color of brake fluid at some point in its life. The only thing I can think that it's kind of colored now is maybe like a tea or coffee kind of color. But yeah, this brake fluid either got A, really warm, or B, it's probably the original brake fluid, I would think, that shipped with the truck. Either way, it's got some fresh fluid in the lines now, and it'll have an even more fresh fluid in the lines once we go to reinstall that and bleed the brakes again. So that being said, a little bit of a ramble, and I apologize I didn't show you putting those push rods back in, because there's going to be a lot more of that to come, especially if we find out that the lower end of this engine is good. Then obviously, you know, we'll document the process just like we did with the 2500, as far as the reassembly, you know, kind of putting everything back together. And interesting enough, there is a playlist for the black truck that you see in the background, if you haven't seen it already. That is us tearing down literally the top part of the motor and doing an upgraded cam and upgraded push rods, very similar to what we're going to be doing here. Even though this is a 5.7 and that black truck has a 6.4 in it, it's almost identical as far as the tear down in it, because Hemi engine's a Hemi engine. That one just has a bigger displacement in it than this one does. So if you're interested, I'll put a link to the playlist at the end of this video. Feel free to check that out, and like I said, that will go into a bit more detail than what we've currently taped on this one. But I will bring you back as we get these pieces tore off, and especially as we get once we get these cylinder heads out again, just to kind of look at the state of those lifters and those cylinders. But with that being said, I'll cut it loose at this point, and if you haven't subscribed and would like to do so, please continue doing so. I think we just irked over the 900 subscriber count for the channel, which is awesome. The goal is to hit that first milestone of 1,000. So if you haven't done so already and you would like to do so, please consider subscribing. With that, I'll let you go. I wish I had better news for you, but the good news is that we're gonna get into the tear down and hopefully rebuild of a 5.7. And with that, I'll let you go. Thank you much.